He had no connections, and he had all of $40 and some fabric and his mother's sewing machine, but a desire that was burning in him to develop and create this clothing brand for men of the culture. Every time you catch yourself worrying about something that you can't control, I need you to redirect your focus. Ask yourself, what's one thing that I can do right now that's within my control? That shift alone will be incredibly empowering and powerful. And for the things that you can't control, I got an encouragement for you. Let it go. I will tell you that if you adopt the mentality of starting where you are with what you have and doing what you're capable of doing, I guarantee you everything will turn around. Focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. Hey, my friend, welcome back to another episode of the MindShift podcast. And today I'd like to share with you what I think is a very powerful concept that I think can help transform your business and your life. About 8 years ago, I posted this quote on social media, and I'd like to share that with you right now. And the quote went like this: focus on what you can control, not what you can't control. What you have, not what you don't have, and what you can do, not what you can't do. And in today's episode, I'd like to unpack this one quote together for the next few minutes, and I'd like to see if it will create a real shift in your mindset and in how you approach whatever it is you're facing right now. Let's start with the very first part of the quote, and that is focus on what you can control, not what you can't control. You know, how many times in life have we found ourselves worrying about things that were completely out of our control? Maybe it's the economy, maybe it's a client's decision, maybe it's even the weather outside when you had planned to go have a picnic. Could have been a situation that we just got through, like COVID. Well, even in these big events that are uncontrollable, we've all been in a situation where we sometimes fixate ourselves on the uncontrollable factors and find ourselves wasting very precious energy and time and energy that could be directed towards the things we can actually influence about a situation. You know, this reminds me of a story back in the days of Steve Jobs, early days of Steve Jobs, and was forced out of the very company he co-founded. Everyone knows what company that is. That's called Apple. And this situation instantly became out of his control. But instead of being focused on him being ousted as the CEO, he focused instead on investing in Next, the other computer company, Next. He also invested in Pixar. Those of you who know Pixar, you know the story there. These decisions were within his control, even though the thing that was out of his control happened, and I'm sure he wasn't happy about it. But these next decisions changed his direction of personal growth and ultimately paved the way for him to come back to Apple and do the things that we all know about Apple today. Jobs couldn't change the boards or control the board's decision, but what he did was took control of his response to it. And that, of course, that response changed the course of history as we know it. So in your situation, I want you to think about a moment about one of your current challenges. And mentally, I want you to sort through in a mental list, and maybe you want to pull out a piece of paper, sort through the things that you can control. And then on the other side of things, think about the things you can't control. And for the things that you can't control, I got an encouragement for you. Let it go. It's just as simple as that, though it's not easy. And I know. Listen, just a week or so ago, there was a major technology outage that grounded flights everywhere here in America. And I remember seeing clips on social media because I don't really watch the news, but I saw some clips on social media, and the employees of the airlines were absolutely getting tortured by upset customers. And I get it. I'm traveling this week, and I can't imagine what it would have been like. But here are these unsuspecting customers also standing next to this unsuspecting team member for these airlines. And I remember one of the videos where the person was yelling at the top of their lungs at their team member, at the airline employee, saying, "Well, if you were going to cancel the flight, why didn't you tell us 3 or 4 hours ago before I drove all the way down here?" And I'm sitting there thinking, like, I wasn't there, so I don't, but I'm sure that the employee had no intention on the flight being canceled because they were notified that the flight was canceled at the same time the customer was. So, listen, every time you catch yourself worrying about something that you can't control, I need you to redirect your focus. Ask yourself, what's one thing that I can do right now that's within my control? That shift alone will be incredibly empowering and powerful. And it'll move you to a place from helplessness or feeling like you're a victim to a point of action. And that, my friends, is where real change begins when we take the action on the things that we can control. Now, let's move on to the second part of the quote. The second part of the quote says, focus on what you have, not what you don't have. And in business and life, it's really easy to get caught up in what we lack. Maybe you're thinking, well, if I only had more capital to grow my business, if I only had the network to get to my right customer or to get to the right people who can loan me the money or get to the right people with the right suppliers, if I only grew up with parents who had money, if I only went to that school, sound familiar at all? Any of it? Right? But here's what I want to challenge you to do. I want to challenge you to flip the script. And I want you to, instead of focusing on what you don't have or what you didn't grow up with or what someone else has that you don't have, I want you to get real crystal clear about your skills and about your experiences and about your resources. These are your assets. These are the gifts that you've been given. And this principle reminds me a lot of Daymond John. Everybody knows Daymond John from Shark Tank, but before Shark Tank, he was the founder of Fubu, right? And Fubu started in the early 90s, right? When I was coming out of high school in the 1990s, he didn't have much, right? If you've never read The Power of Broke, I'd recommend you read that. I mean, he was waiting tables, I believe, at Red Lobster. He didn't have any fashion industry experience. He had no connections, and he had all of $40 and some fabric and his mother's sewing machine, but a desire that was burning in him to develop and create this clothing brand for men of the culture, right? For the hip hop culture, for the Black community. And he focused and got to work on the assets that he had, and he took the action. He and his friends, they started they started with hats, they started with shirts, and everybody knows what became of it, right out of his mother's house in Hollis, Queens, and went to the streets of New York. And he just took what he had and his creativity and his hustle and his understanding of what the target market was looking for. And I believe he even borrowed at some point $100,000 from his mom on a mortgage to invest back in his business. That was a huge risk. He talks about it also in his book, Rise and Grind. So, between both of those books, there's two great books to dig into this story a little further. But he believed in what he was building. He didn't worry about the obstacles. He didn't worry about what he didn't have. He focused on his ideas. He focused on his work ethic. He focused on his roots in the community. And he focused on serving and building a product that was desirable by people. He turned Fubu, as you all know, into a global brand worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And he didn't wait for circumstances to be ideal. And that's what my encouragement is for you. Make the most of what you have available right now. I remember 25 years ago now, when I started one of my businesses, I was sleeping on the floor on an air mattress in an apartment. That was what I had at that moment. I was going through some things, right? Anybody listening to this going through some things? Sometimes you just can't let your current circumstances be the reason or the barrier for stopping your dreams, right? I remember when I started, I just knew that though I had a few hurdles, I had a few setbacks, I had a few breakdowns, as you know, we talk about here, I wasn't going to let that be a disadvantage for where I was. You know, I will tell you that if you adopt the mentality of starting where you are with what you have and doing what you're capable of doing, I guarantee you everything will turn around. So, what I want you to do is I want you to make a list of the resources with whatever it is you're working on, right? Everybody has one of the most powerful resources on the planet in these smartphones, whether it's an iPhone or God help you if you're carrying an Android. Anyway, I'm just playing with you, Android folks. Don't leave me bad reviews. But you might be surprised if you really just take inventory, right? Part of the mind shift mentality here is when we focus on what we have, we're going to take our focus on what it is we have and not what it is we don't have. And you will be surprised at how many resources you actually have. Like what's really right in front of you, you're just underestimating what it is you have. So I want you to focus on the opportunities. I want you to focus on the things, the skills, the resources that you have, the people that you know. Don't worry about the people you don't know, right? And start to leverage those existing resources in ways that are creative, that'll take you forward towards where you're going. All right, next, let's talk about the last part of the quote, and that is to focus on what you can do, not what you can't do, right? I think this is where the rubber meets the road. If we're really talking about it, we talked a little bit about it earlier, and that is taking action even when you feel like you're limited in your skills. All too often we get paralyzed about and thinking about things about what we can't do. We get a lot of paralysis of analysis in our head about, oh, I can't afford this marketing campaign, or oh, I can't afford to compete with these competitors, or oh, I can't afford to hire this person, or oh, I can't afford to buy this house, or oh, I can't afford to go to this school. And all that thinking does is keep us stuck, right? I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm hoping to just be a reminder for you today. Brings me up to another story. Very famous entrepreneur that I'm a fan of, Richard Branson, who founded Virgin Airlines. 1979, I remember a story. He was stranded in Puerto Rico. And during the time this flight was canceled to the Virgin Islands he was trying to get to, and instead of focusing on the fact that the flights were canceled and he couldn't reschedule the flight, and I don't remember the exact whole story, but he focused on what he could do. And so what he ended up doing was he chartered a plane and then borrowed some sort of board, blackboard, cardboard, something like that. And on the back of it, he wrote Virgin Airlines, $39 one way to BVI. Okay. He walked around the airport and filled up the chartered plane with other passengers. So let's think about that. He's stuck and he's going somewhere. And he's like, well, I'm not the only person who needs to get there. So let me use my resources. He charters a plane and then starts walking around the airport with a sign talking about one way to the airport, BVI, and it's $39. And that literally was the birth of Virgin Airlines, metaphorically speaking. He couldn't control the flight cancellation. He couldn't control the response to it. All he could do was focus on what decision will I make that will get me closer to where I want to be. And lo and behold, that becomes the creation of a major international airline. So wherever you are right now, we're not talking about creating airlines in your situation today. Maybe that's your gift, maybe that's your goal, but it's probably not, right? With whatever it is you're working on, what can you do? That's what I want you to ask yourself right now. What can you do? Even if it's something small, even if, as long as it's a step forward. You can't afford the big marketing campaign, but I guarantee you can afford to post on social media for free. Don't have the right relationships? I guarantee you there are some networking groups and some podcasts and some other folks where you can start collaborating and connecting. Perhaps you are dealing in your market industry space and you're seeing another competitor offer something that you don't have the capability to deliver. Well, then shrink your product offering down to where you can appeal to a niche audience. The goal, my friend, is to create momentum through the right actions, not staying paralyzed and complaining about the things that you can't do, right? I've seen this play out so many times in my life. I remember starting early in one of my companies. and we were bootstrapped. In fact, most of my companies, all my companies have been bootstrapped. And I remember wanting to start this massive direct mail campaign. And you needed a good chunk of change back then. I know that sounds a little archaic to all of those of us who are in the digital landscape now. We ran newspaper ads, magazine ads, and these things cost a lot of money back then. Running print media, I know stamps today are 70 cents a pop, but back then it was a lot to put together a bulk mail campaign. So I decided to do something different. I decided, well, I don't have the budget to reach 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 homes at that time. So I decided to play and marginalize my opportunity and say, well, let me carve out the best people of the 10, 20, or 30,000 and just market to them. And I literally started my budget with a $200 a month mailing campaign versus the $5,000 a month campaign that they were pitching me. And of course, we had massive success because I ended up learning a lesson in focusing on what I could do. See, when I only have the $200 a month resource, I now have to look for a different problem in that big subset of the 10,000. This isn't a marketing lesson about direct mail, but it's about focusing on what you have and doing the things that you can do. I've seen it all over with businesses over the last 14, 15 years at our agency who come in and they want to grow their businesses and they sometimes feel like, can I really do anything with this budget? The answer is we can do something with every budget, right? The bottom line is we can always put together a strategy. So focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. Make sure you're seeing progress. Make sure you're making forward progress. And no matter what, and no matter how small, I guarantee you it will be motivating to see that momentum forward. So there you have it. 3 powerful shifts, at least I think so, that you can use starting today, right? Focus, number 1, on what you can control, just like Steve Jobs and many other examples that I could have pulled up when he was kicked out of his own company in Apple. Like Daymond John, focus on what you have, whether it's $40 in a sewing machine in your mom's house, or whether it's $200 and living on a couch or living on a mattress, and what I was doing with my work, or whether it's Richard Branson, when you focus on what you can do, which is to decide to inadvertently create an airline when you charter a plane to help passengers get somewhere that you're also stranded to get to as well. I want to challenge you to apply these principles in some area of your life this week, not next week, this week. Take note of how it changes your perspective. Take note of how you feel and take note of the actions that you take. Remember, success isn't about figuring everything out from the beginning. It's about starting. I say it so many times. Just start. Just start with the intention and you'll figure it all out along the way. It's about making the most of what you have right now where you are. And here's what I know. You got this, right? I believe in you. I can't wait to hear what shifts happen in your life as a result of today's episode. If anything, message me on social media at Mr. Darrell Evans. If you're a listener here today for the first time and this has moved you in any sort of way, I'd ask you and invite you to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening and make sure you never miss another episode of the MindShift podcast. To join the community, which is free, head over to mindshiftcommunity.com. And until next week, I'll see you on another episode of the MindShift podcast. Take care. Hit the subscribe button so you can become a part of the MindShift community. We'll help you shift your mind so you can shift your results.